I am not a superhuman, right? I have a license to practice medicine, but I don't have a degree in martyrdom, right? I cannot live my life for these standards of perfection and martyrdom, or I'm not going to be here to live this life.
Triggering content warning. This episode discusses mental health and suicide. If you're struggling, please call or text 988 for support. Welcome to Success Reimagined. I am Dr. Amna Shabbir, your host on this journey to thrive at the intersection of ambition and wellness. In every episode, I'll help you challenge outdated definitions of success, discover practical tools and strategies for growth without compromising your well-being. I am so glad you've joined me. Let's reimagine what's possible together. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest, Dr. Laura Vater. Dr. Vater is a gastrointestinal oncologist at the Indiana University Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center, where she leads the young onset colorectal and GI cancer program. Beyond her clinical practice, Dr. Vater is a writer, TEDx and commencement speaker, and a passionate advocate for the well-being of patients and healthcare workers. She co-founded the Writing for Wellness Narrative Medicine program at Indiana University School of Medicine and developed the SMILE Scale, a wellness behavior tool designed to support both patients and clinicians. I personally started following her on Instagram a while ago and noted the impactful content she shares, which includes her own thoughts as well as amplifying other clinicians' words, which I found extremely beautiful. Welcome, Dr. Vater.
Thank you, Amna. I'm thrilled to be here.
We were having a lot of fun conversation before we jumped into actually pressing record. Today, we're talking about the concept of perfectionism, and I love to start these conversations by asking you, what does perfectionism mean to you?
Oh, gosh, there's so much in that word. For me, it really means holding myself to an impossible standard, having these unrealistic expectations of what I can do in a single day and what I can do in a single lifetime. I grew up being a really high achieving kid, really always wanting to get top of my class, A's in everything, perfect test scores. And as I progressed through college and was around very intelligent people at Notre Dame and in really rigorous science classes, I realized, oh my gosh, everyone else here is also really smart, and maybe I'm just average. And that was really, really hard for me at that moment of my life. And we can dive more into that. But I think it's really thinking that whatever I put my energy into, I'm going to achieve it perfectly. And sometimes even the first time that I try.
The first time that you try, that really struck me right there because I personally can relate with that. I also noticed that my own daughter, I tried to create this anti-perfect environment, quote unquote, but still we're trying to strive for healthy things. She has to do the right thing the first time, and the right thing, the perfect thing. What you have described over here, like the two words that come to my mind is like almost this pressure cooker where you are surrounded by extremely intelligent humans and then you don't feel good enough. And then also you're having this internal journey. Other than like just the medicine field and your academic journey, I was listening to one of your interviews and I found out that you were a gymnast. So paint this journey for us. Like, if you were to just step back, you are a gymnast, there are elements of perfectionism there. You go on to academics, you are right now in academics. How has perfectionism sort of shaped this whole life journey, quote unquote?
I think sports. I was an athlete all throughout my life, played volleyball and I did gymnastics and played many other sports. I think sports does a really good job of teaching you and that you will fail. Even if you're really good at what you do, sometimes you will not have enough players there and you'll forfeit, or you'll do your best, but you'll fall off the balance beam. I remember I used to do my gymnastics routines in my head whenever I had a stagnant moment in my life. If I was riding in a passenger in a car or if I was trying to fall asleep, I would be on the uneven bars and I would be doing my routine mentally over and over and over and over and trying to do it perfectly. Right. So that was the mental expectation that I had and I was trying to create for myself. But then sometimes you would hurt your ankle, or sometimes you would just have an off day, or sometimes you would be sick. And there would be times where I would fall. like we all do in life, right? So experiencing failure is something that I learned early on in gymnastics to try to know that it would happen, but then to try to, as quickly as possible, almost pretend like it didn't happen. And so even when I was a kid, let's say that I didn't get a perfect score on a test. My parents did not put this pressure on me. I will just say that. I have two siblings. I'm in the middle. My siblings did not put this pressure on themselves. They both were good students, but they did not have this like perfectionism drive. But for some reason, I did. And my parents didn't put this on me, but I put this on myself. So if I would miss a question, I wouldn't show anyone, right? I remember that one time I didn't do very well on an essay. I spent a long time on it, and I just, for whatever reason, I got a C on this essay. And I remember that I folded it up and I put it in my pocket, and I never showed anyone. I was so ashamed of that failure. So I think for me, there was some personal association with, I knew I was going to fail, but that failure should be concealed as much as possible. And I think that I carried that forward. And I think that the culture of medicine kind of perpetuated that. I don't know if you felt that in your training and in your career, but if there's ever even a bit of fatigue, or you accidentally pulled up the wrong patient's chart and you about to accidentally put a medicine in the other patient's chart and you'd been awake for 30 hours, you would never tell anyone that, right? So you're taught very early that you're a robot or you're a superhuman, and there's this expectation of perfection, although you are human. And so in many ways, I think it set me up to be completely, I think, surprised when I declined in my own mental health, when I was just struggling so hard to work and work and work and be awake 30 hours every third or fourth night on call when I was a resident and applying for fellowship and trying to do that application perfectly and trying to be a perfect mother to my 2-year-old daughter and trying to perfectly care for my patients in the ICU who were coding and dying, right? It was this perfect storm of like, I felt like every day that I continued, that was in my second year residency, right before I applied for fellowship in my third year. And it was this overwhelming pressure of, I just don't have anything left to give. And I'm trying to do everything perfectly because nothing in my life can be done imperfectly, right? Perfection is the standard. And it just led me to this deep level of exhaustion, burnout, depression, and eventually suicidal ideation. And that was really the critical moment in my life that I thought, I am not a superhuman, right? I have a license to practice medicine. I don't have a degree in martyrdom, right? I cannot live my life for these standards of perfection and martyrdom, or I'm not going to be here to live this life.
I first want to hold space for what you just shared and the incredible courage that is needed to even share something so deep. So thank you. I also really want to emphasize that the word that comes to my mind is this sheer exhaustion where you're trying to be perfect, quote unquote, and not have any kind of error, any room for humanity. But I'm sure that you were also had a communication skills session where you're supposed to learn empathy. So you're not supposed to be human, but you're supposed to be empathetic. And then you have to do it all. You have to do life in total while looking absolutely flawless. So it's like, I can't show my struggle, but I also must look like I've got it all together all the time.
Absolutely. I think for me, there was even another layer. So as a mother, my daughter, I was a non-traditional medical student. Which means I took 3-year gap between college and medical school. So I was a bit older when I started. And my husband and I, we didn't want to wait until we were done with residency, fellowship, all of this to have a child. And so we decided to have my daughter when I was a fourth year medical student, which is a window that you have a little bit more time. And so my daughter was born when I was a fourth year medical student when I was 28. And I then became an intern, which is my first year of residency, and became this doctor in training with a child. And so I was the only mother in my residency class. I was the only one that had a kid. And so I said, I need to represent women in medicine, especially mothers in medicine well. So I had this extra layer of perfection that I put on myself. I was never going to miss a day. I was never going to call in sick, even if my kid was sick. I didn't take off when my daughter was in the ER. I thought that I needed to show up and be an even more dedicated, competent resident than my peers because I was so afraid of someone saying, oh, Laura is a terrible doctor because she's so distracted because she has a kid. I was really afraid of that, right? So I was holding these two things of trying to be an even more, I guess we could use the word perfect, or an even more competent physician, dedicated physician. And I was also trying to raise a young child. And I was holding both of these things at the same time. And I really, really did not want someone to. I think that there's a lot of fear surrounding perfectionism when we really look at this, right? Why is it that we are holding ourselves to these standards? And I think a lot of it is because we're afraid of what other people think of us and what will they say if for some reason, right? If I, as a mother and resident who was working more than 80 hours a week and had a 2-year-old daughter and was sleep deprived and trying to do all of these extra modules and applications and all of this, right? If everyone around me seemed to be doing just fine, what was wrong with me, right? Why can't I cut it? Why can't I achieve to the level of the others? And I think that that really affected my identity, right? And so I was trying so hard just to pretend that everything was fine. And in that really difficult season of my life, I didn't tell anyone other than my husband. And he didn't even really know the depths of it. And I kept showing up to work. I kept going through the motions. Even when I was at my lowest point of mental health, I taught my interns and I sat with my patients and I put in orders and I wrote my notes and I did not miss a single day because I was so afraid of what that would mean as a mother in medicine. I wanted to hold myself. To be clear, no one around me was holding me to these standards, right? There were people around me who cared about me and program leaders who cared about me and co-residents that cared about me. And if I had just said, I need to take a day or I need to take a week, I'm sure that that would have been met with kindness and compassion, but I put that on myself. And I was so afraid of not looking that I was strong or that I was competent in the way that I had tried so hard to create this identity.
Self-concealment is so prevalent, the way it shows up, and as you explained your story, I could see snippets of myself right there, and part of these conversations that I'm trying to have is for this exact reason, to share how we might appear flawless or we might appear a certain way, but we're not. We're actually struggling in silence. My parents didn't even know the extent of my postpartum depression. They didn't even know that I had postpartum depression. I wrote an article, and when the article got published, I sent that to my dad when he was visiting. About 4 or 5 years later, for my younger child, I had struggled both times, but it was just this fear that if I shared, they were going to think that they were failures. Or my dad looked at the article and he just looked at me and he said, "Good." And I was not expecting that as his answer. And I said, "What?" He said, "Good that you share, that you got help when you were struggling and now you're helping others." And that is, I was so like biased against my own father, culturally, socially speaking. There was no planet on which his response would have been that. But at that time, like you mentioned, that you have to be so quiet and you are the model person. And the other thing that came up to me as you talked about your personal experience was there was a moment in fellowship where I felt that my children were an inconvenience. And I literally wrote an article titled, "My Children Are an Inconvenience," that never got published because later on I felt so sad when I read it. Because that's what happened. We had the COVID closures and daycares just kept falling out, and I was the only fellow who had to deal with, where do I place my children? I don't have family close by.
Well, thank you for sharing both of those. I think both of those are very, very vulnerable things to share, right? I know that we as women in medicine, especially if we have children, we really cannot say, oh my gosh, sometimes I feel burdened to be a parent and to carry this load that everyone else is carrying. But it is exceedingly hard to come home and to have a child that needs your love, your time, and your attention when you're already exhausted. And then just for you sharing that element of having postpartum depression and writing about it and sharing it with your family, I think that the more that we can share our own stories that are often kind of shrouded in shame, the more that we can help others know that they're not alone. So thank you so much for sharing that. I found that too, that like this expectation to be a certain way, maybe that's especially as women, and there's some socialization that happens, right? For women to act a certain way and to be a certain way, to be agreeable and right, to always love and feel they're never burdened by their children. I also feel that, especially as a woman in medicine, we often find that women spend more time with patients and sometimes often provide more thorough care and can have better outcomes. The other side of that too, though, is that I think at least personally, I don't know if this resonates with you. I also notice that I have these perfectionist tendencies in my work with patients. And it's really hard in all of medicine, and especially oncology, where the treatments are often standardized, right? So we give the same dose of the same chemotherapy. Of course, it's nuanced based on lab results and age and all of this, but we generally give similar medicines, and yet we can't predict the outcomes. I have found myself sometimes lying awake at night thinking about what could I have done differently for this patient, or what should I have been able to see that I couldn't have seen at the moment. And it's not that there's necessarily a good answer. And the other piece of this too is I just had this experience with a patient this week that is going through something exceedingly difficult without very much social support, really going through cancer at a young age with no family support. And this person is carrying a lot of anger about some things that have happened in their past, but that is being kind of displaced or kind of placed on my care team, right? And so I'm sitting with this person doing everything that I can to show the highest level of presence and compassion and care during a really difficult time, and being fully met with cruel words, right? To be treated that way and to know that oftentimes the people that need love the most can be the least lovable, right? Can be the most unlovable. And yet, with every single patient, right, I expect, okay, I'm going to walk in this room, I'm going to show them compassion, we're going to have a great connection, we're going to build a rapport, I'm going to help walk them through this hard thing. And I think I have this expectation in my mind that this is the doctor that I want to be. And sometimes, for whatever reason, oftentimes things outside of my own control, that doesn't always happen. And I think it's really unsettling for me because I truly strive so hard to give my patients the best possible experience when they're going through something awful. And I hold myself to a level of perfection, especially in those encounters where I'm communicating with patients and building rapport. It was just very unsettling. I kept thinking about it all week, and I kept thinking, my gosh, why is my mind still like spinning on this? What could I have said differently? What could I have done differently? And the answer is there are no perfect words, and all we can do is give our best in every circumstance, knowing that the outcome is not in our control, and the outcome is not what we're going to expect. And every single day we are going to encounter unexpected things. And I've come to try to anticipate the unexpected.
It is so important for us to lean in those words that you've just shared, especially as clinicians, as we talk about our careers, as we talk about life. Zooming out, we're taking extremely smart humans and then we're lumping them together. And then just keep naturally selecting to be in very competitive arms further, such as yourself. You're extremely being an oncologist in and of itself is, you've worked so hard to get to this point, and then all of a sudden you walk out the door and there are outcomes. You have extremely sick patients and you can't control outcomes. And that is right there. It's the separation almost. And kind of circling back a little bit to something you had shared earlier. And I love the talks that you give extensively on compassion fatigue. You talked about compassion. I remember hearing you say in one of the interviews, when we, the physicians, are dehumanized, we also dehumanize our patients. It is this cycle when we talk about like exhaustion, we talk about achievement, we talk about hiding shame. I feel that it almost perpetuates the perfectionistic narratives that we're holding on to in medicine. I would love to hear your thoughts on compassion fatigue overlying all of this when we talk about perfectionism.
Yes. So I think compassion fatigue, right? It's in some ways related to this concept burnout that we all hear about. But compassion fatigue is really the emotional and sometimes physical exhaustion that happens when we care for other people. This can happen in therapists, this can happen in parents, this can happen in caregivers, but it happens to clinicians too, right? So there's this emotional and physical exhaustion, and often this loss of empathy that comes when we are really having these prolonged exposures to caring for others without adequate rest and without adequate time to recuperate. And what does that look like day to day? I've had a lot of other clinicians share with me their own personal experience of this, but I'll share mine first. I remember being a really exhausted resident, and it was 4 a.m. and I was in the medical ICU. I was the only doctor covering the ICU for the night for a very long list of very sick patients. And you know what that's like being in, you're an internal medicine resident too. And I remember getting another admission. I got a message on my phone that I had a new admission of a patient with a stroke. And we were the admitting team for strokes in this hospital. And I remember being so exhausted that this new patient, meant that I would get zero sleep for the rest of the night, right? That meant that my window of sleep just disappeared. I remember just my back aching and my head hurting and just my body kind of having that almost like floating out of body, kind of numb feeling when I was walking into the ER. And I remember walking into the room and seeing that the patient's stroke was so severe. They had a breathing tube, but they didn't need any medicines to keep them sedated. So that meant that the stroke was really severe. And there was a young woman sitting next to this man. And I remember standing there, and the first thing she said to me was, "Please save my father. He's all I have." And I remember in that moment standing there, wishing that I could have deep compassion for her and just feeling empty, right? Just feeling like I had nothing left in the tank. And then this really shameful thought, entered my mind and said, I hope this doesn't drag on forever, right? It was almost that this person in that moment was the barrier to my well-being and my sleep. And I carried the shame, right? So then I took care of them and I admitted them and I sat down with them and I tried my best to be the doctor that I wanted to be. I felt like a shell of myself in that exhausted moment. I tried to do the best that I could in that moment, but I carried that shame of that thought that I had in that moment for a long time. I thought, man, something's really wrong with me. Residency has changed me. What's happening? And I felt for a long time that if anyone should be able to care in that moment, it should have been me, because my mom had a stroke when I was a first-year medical student. And I was once the daughter sitting beside the bed, terrified. I spent 2 weeks sitting beside her bed in the ICU, doctors running in and out, doing all sorts of flashlights in the eyes and all of the neurologic exams. And I thought myself, okay, this is a daughter at a bedside. I've been the daughter at the bedside, right? And I remember when my mom was sick, I kept thinking, gosh, I wish these doctors would just slow down and speak words I could understand. I wish that they would show a little bit of compassion. And she still received excellent care, but I just kept thinking, I'm never going to be that type of doctor, right? And then I recognized in the moment that only years later, when I was the doctor in that room, thinking the doctors that took care of my mom, it wasn't that they were uncaring, they were just completely exhausted. So when I wrote about this, I actually have an essay about this coming out next week. And I have come to learn through my own study and my own exploration that there's actually data to support that when we are sleep deprived, we lose our empathy. So they studied with MRI scans, they studied people after 24 hours awake, so after a night of no sleep, and they had far less activity in the empathy areas of their brain. And they also found that in another study that doctors who were sleep deprived were actually felt lower levels of empathy for patients in pain and were less likely to prescribe pain medicine. We know through data that when you're sleep deprived, not only is your mind impaired to make decisions, you're more likely to make a medical error, more likely to get in a car accident, but you're more likely to be angry. You're more likely to have a shortened fuse, and it's really hard to have patience and generosity. We know that when we launch forward in terms of daylight savings time in the spring, we know the week after people are sleep deprived by a single hour as a country, that generous giving, charitable gifts go way down. We know that this is not, I just say this because I carried a lot of shame personally, and other people have shared similar stories of what they faced when they were tired. And there's this, again, this perfection of my expectation of who I wanted to be. But I was facing exhaustion and a physiologic depletion of empathy in that moment. And I think part of that has helped me to release some of that shame that I experienced, knowing that I am not superhuman, that if I do not have things like rest and adequate nutrition and appropriate hydration and things like exercise, that my body is just not going to function at the same level. And I think that we need to care about clinicians as whole human beings, because in that way we really can dehumanize our patients, right? So in that moment when we are sleep deprived and we don't have breaks and we're overworked, right? We are dehumanized, right? somehow expected to be robots. And in those moments, though, we cannot be the clinicians that we could be if we were fully rested. And so in that way, I really do believe that we can dehumanize our patients.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really want to emphasize the point where you took us to that exam room and you shared that required immense amount of courage to actually say those words, which pretty much every clinician has said in their own mind at some point. And I also want to echo a situation here that happened to me personally. And I was on the other side of the exam table. I'm in my residency. I get some unfortunate news. I'm expecting, the same day I find out that I'm expecting, I get this news and I'm in the ER. And the physician's talking to me. First of all, none of what he said, I was a doctor, should have made sense to me, but was making any sense because I'm sort of processing. And afterwards, I get handed a prescription, which could have potentially caused a lot of side effects in my unborn child then. And I didn't fill it. And I go to see the subspecialist the next day. And they say, oh, thank God you didn't take that prescription. And my initial thought was, and I've never even talked about it openly, it's amazing because I myself was in residency at that time. I was relieved, but not once did I sort of like have this, oh my God, what did this other subspecialist, this person, they gave me this prescription because I was so bone tired. I knew that the other person was also post call at that time when they had written that prescription. So there was this like almost, I see you and I kind of get it. So I never followed up with them. I never erased, I never even talked about it. But later in future, I see it because, and now when I'm doing some of this advocacy work, we keep talking about burnout, we talk about healthcare system, we talk about all these things. The first thing we need is rest. And the clinicians, they need sleep, they need rest. Without meeting basic physiologic needs, you cannot start talking about mindset changes. I love coaching. I am a coach myself. I'm not going to coach somebody who's not slept. What are we even talking about? And, I love that you talk about rest and the shame and the guilt that surrounds rest, which is something I've really struggled with. And so thank you for sharing the data behind it, which is shocking to me that you can actually see changes that are that drastic. Now, as a perfectionist, I really struggle to rest. And you have created this amazing tool called the Smile Scale. How can I give myself permission to rest, Dr. Water? And can you tell us about the Smile Scale? I know there are two questions and I've thrown them both at you.
I'm with you. I love both of my parents so much. My dad was an early bird. He'd wake up at like 5 or 6 a.m. my whole childhood and like be outside chopping wood. He's an engineer and just loved being outdoors and go for walks and be in the garden. My mom was the night owl who's like, let's have a glass of wine and watch SNL, right? And so, like, my mom's a primary care physician and a wonderful person, but she worked long hours. And so her only really moment of rest was kind of that few, maybe hour in the late evening. And so it's really funny. I grew up loving both of my parents deeply and wanting to like wake up early and have a cup of coffee with my dad and like be in the garden or out walking, and then wanted to hang out with my mom and watch SNL at night. And then I would, I was like, wow, but if I do this, that's not enough sleep. Right. And so I think, and of course, the circadian rhythms that we all experience, right? So when you're a teenager and a college student, your circadian rhythm is naturally to wake up very late, sometimes even at 10 a.m., 11 a.m., noon. And then that starts to go back as you get older. For a long time, I thought, I don't need sleep. Sleep is the last thing that I really need. And so I'm with you. And I think that both of my parents are the type of people that would like work and come home and work all day at home. And there wasn't really a lot of, let's just sit down and do nothing in my family. If we were going to do something together, it was probably going to be something active. And so I carried this shame about rest. And I thought for a long time that rest meant that I was lazy. If I was just sitting around doing nothing, then I was lazy. If I was sleeping in, that meant I was lazy. Not that my parents really put this on me, but it was something that I internalized. And of course, something that I really learned in medicine, right, is that maybe I don't need rest. Maybe I don't actually need sleep. And I unfortunately learned this the really hard way. After working 5 months of very long calls, my sleep fractured, and that was in my residency that I discussed earlier about being very sleep deprived, and unfortunately it affected my mental health in a very severe way. And I've had to be very intentional about how do I set up my life after training to protect my sleep as much as possible, which is why I have chosen the practice that I have. I don't have very much call. I generally get a good night's sleep even when I'm on call because I I'm on call from home and there are not that many calls. And so I have intentionally set up my life that way. But it is still very hard for me to say no to things because I'm a high achieving perfectionist person in the environment that I work. And so if someone asks me to do something and I have a free window, I think, well, I technically can do it. Shouldn't I do it? Shouldn't I do it if I have the capacity to do it? And then I find myself saying yes to a whole bunch of things. And then I get sick. Like last 2 weeks ago, I got sick. My daughter was sick. All the viruses came through. And I had all these things on my calendar. And I was like, why did I say yes to this? And of course, I'm on social media. So I have people that want to meet with me and say, oh, do you want to represent so and so and so and so? Or do you want to do this thing? And it's wonderful to say, oh, do I want to promote this brand or do these things? But I got to this point where my husband and I was like, I'm going to have to say no to everything that comes in over the next few months. I need to just prioritize what really matters. So sleep is vital. I've learned the hard way for our mental health. When you're sleep deprived, it's an independent risk factor for anxiety, depression, and suicide. If you're not sleeping, if you're chronically, not sleeping well, it more than doubles your risk of cancer, increases your risk for heart disease and stroke and diabetes and weight gain and all sorts of things, right? And so it's really, really important for our bodies that we sleep, and it's really important for our minds. So I learned this the hard way. Now I'm like I go to bed at this time, I wake up at this time type of person where sleep is almost one of the things that I prioritize almost above everything else in my life. And I hope I can give permission to you and to everyone else who might be listening from the perspective of just taking care of your body and living well today, but also having longevity, that sleep is going to be a really important factor in that. So the Smile Scale is a tool that I created to kind of help nudge myself in the right direction. It's really not another tool to try to make us feel like we have to strive to this unrealistic perfectionist thing. But the Smile Scale is basically a self-check-in tool. So I'll invite you, Amna, to do this with me here and to really release any guilt that you might have regarding this. It's just meant to say, is there an area of these 5 different behaviors that maybe I could kind of nudge myself? If every single day I'm not, a whole week passes and I'm pretty low on not getting in my fruits and veggies, maybe that's the area that I just need to work a little, maybe focus on that. So I invite you to join us on this. We've actually studied this among patients. There are some nursing groups that have studied this tool, and it's been shown to help improve quality of life. So the first question to ask yourself, right, of the Smile Scale is about sleep. So am I getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep? Have I had 7 to 9 hours of sleep in the last 24 hours? If that answer is yes, give yourself 1 point. If that answer is no, don't be too hard on yourself. Who knows why that could be, but give yourself 0. The next question is move my body. Have I been physically active for 30 minutes or more in the last 24 hours? And you've been walking with your job, you've been taking the stairs, so trying to be physically active every single day. If that answer is yes, give yourself 1 point. The next one's about stress reduction, inhale and exhale. Have I found at least 10 minutes to reduce my stress in a healthy way in the last 24 hours? That might be prayer, deep breathing, meditation. It might be, depending on where you're located geographically, a walk outside. That could be listening to music or reading a book that you love, just some type of healthy way to reduce your stress. If that answer is yes, give yourself 1 point. L is love and connect. Have I had at least one meaningful interaction with another person today? Ideally, that's going to be among your 1 to 3 closest people. We know that those are the relationships that are the most protective for our health as we age, per the Harvard study of adult development. So if that answer is yes, give yourself 1 point. And then E is eat to nourish. Have I eaten at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables in the last 24 hours? If that answer is yes, give yourself 1 point. We know that basically the more whole plants that are not processed, the more you populate your gut with all sorts of good bacteria, and you can lower your risk of things like colon cancer, and you're going to feel better too. So that's the Smile Scale. So then you kind of add up your score for sleep, movement, inhale, exhale, love and connect, eat to nourish. Your score can be anywhere from a 0 to a 5. I've definitely had days where mine was a 0 or a 1, and I tended to not feel as well those days. And definitely on a day where I'm a 4 or 5, I tend to feel a lot better. And then you can just check in. Takes less than a few moments every day to just see where you are on that, and then nudge yourself gently. Maybe you need to focus a little bit more on consistent sleep, where you're going to bed around the same time, you're waking up around the same time. Anchoring your sleep helps protect its quality. Maybe it's throwing in a whole avocado into your work bag and you're cutting it open with a butter knife. Or maybe it's that you take a few extra moments for something that relaxes you every day. But that's the smile scale, and perhaps it might help someone that's listening in today.
I'm sure it's going to help somebody listening in today because you prefaced it by creating this space of psychological safety and non judgment, saying that it's not that you should do all of this. I really appreciate that approach. That right there warms it up. And then every part of this scale is, I feel, very tangible, doable, and it's not something that we hit most often in medicine. I don't remember till I intentionally started my wellness journey and really took a step back that I would even think about. Like, just the disconnect that we have from our bodies is so huge. I think in general, even outside of medicine, we have this very disembodied living. But in medicine specifically, like all our needs are to the side and we're not allowed to have them. So I really appreciate you bringing this in, giving me permission to rest because I also, we represent all these other people who know that, yeah, we should rest. Their data is in there, sleep is good. But when you actually hear real people share these really vulnerable moments as a consequence of not resting and what that does to you, it's so, so important to actually openly talk about it. I want to shift gears just a little bit. You have this incredible presence on social media, and we're talking about perfectionism today. So, how do you show up in such an honest and real way? And you talked a little bit about earlier people connecting to you, reaching out to you, as I've been on my personal entrepreneurial journey as well and being present on social media. Sometimes it's hard to, everyone that's reaching out to me overall has such good intent. And you're also trying to balance yourself. Sometimes I wonder though, this word that comes to my mind is like, I'm always accessible. And so, how do you counter that perfectionist that is very much alive still in you because it never goes away? And I also try to not give, okay, here's this like potion that you're going to drink and you're not no longer going to be a perfectionist. There's no tip, trick, or hack. It's kind of this experience. You bring it to your acknowledgement and awareness and what to do. But for somebody who's so present on social media, who's a mom, who's a physician, how do you manage that? And how do you balance that in a way that it doesn't deplete you?
I have had to be really intentional about that over time because I think if you have perfectionist tendencies, you're going to bring those to all areas of your life. I used to write just for fun, just to journal. And now all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to write a bestseller book and I'm going to write. Or, I'm going to be on social media because I want to connect with other moms in medicine and feel less alone. It can easily become comparison to what are other people doing and what amount of likes and followers do they have. It can become something that could burn you out. So I think just like anything in life, you have to be able to step back from it and say, why am I doing this? Is this important to me? And how can I do so in a way that is authentic to who I am, but also allows space in the margin? I will tell you that it doesn't matter on how many followers you're going to have, hundreds of thousands of followers, and you're still not going to, it's so bizarre, right? It's not going to, and then the algorithm does this to you. It's not going to feel like it's enough, or you'll do a post that doesn't land and you're like, oh, how stupid. Why did I do that? Nobody liked that. It's just human psychology. And it's so interesting how these algorithms kind of manipulate our natural human psychology. I remember thinking I used to I really wanted to respond to every single message that I got because I have a lot of wonderful learners, medical learners or pre-meds around the world who will reach out to me. And I used to answer every message. And then it got to the point where I was just like, I can't do that anymore. And so sometimes like once a month, I'll take an hour and I'll just try to do as many messages as I can. And then I have to say to myself, gosh, I just can't. I can't. I can't do this anymore because if I did that I would be on my phone all day when my child realistically needs me to be paying attention to them. And I have this personal rule that if my daughter is home from school and out not in an activity, that I'm trying to be as present with her as possible, right? I still get pages, I still have patient phone calls, I still have things that I need to do. But I really try to be as present with her as possible because I know she's already 8 and I know that in 10 years she's going to graduate from high school. And I mean, it just goes so fast, right? And so I don't want to look back and say, oh, but I got 10,000 more followers on social media, right? And so it becomes this. I also don't make much video content because I used to try to do that when TikTok first became a thing. And I just found that it took me so much time. I wasn't good at video editing. And then I'd be disappointed in the result. And then I would try to do something that was trendy. And then I was like, oh, that doesn't really I don't feels icky. Like that's not actually me. So I like love to dance, but I've never been like I mean, people do that wonderfully well, but I was just like, no, I can't do that. And then I decided I just really wasn't going to make much video content, even though I had all these great ideas to do it. It just that, and certainly it could have led to growth and whatnot. It just didn't align with what I thought I needed to do. And so it's kind of like the slow burn, like a lot of slow growth when a lot of my kind of peers in my same cohort have kind of had exponential growth. And that's okay, right? It's sitting with, especially if you have both perfectionist and high achieving tendencies, know that you're going to take them to whatever area of your life you're in. And just recognizing that if you can kind of maybe help someone feel less alone, or if you can maybe encourage one person, those are better goals to have than like numbers. And I think they're like this past week when I was sick and kind of overwhelmed with clinical stuff, I think I posted one time, and there'll be days where I post once a day. And so it kind of feels like, how inspired am I to say things? And do I have much to say? And I'm kind of like, I think we all are with what the state of the world right now. I think we're all kind of like, that's a hard place to be in, to really know what to share and how much to share and what to do, and a lot of uncertainty and fear. And so it's kind of all those things wrapped in that sometimes I'm just, can I encourage one person, or can I in some way help someone feel less alone, or can I share something that maybe helps one person release some of the shame they've been carrying? And I think that's a much better way, at least for me. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but for me, that's been something that's been helpful.
Well, I've been in the audience and watching you, and every word of what you just said, it shows your content really is so honest. And if in our audience have not followed you yet, please come on. What are you doing? I'll definitely be linking to your page
And
here.
you, oh my gosh, all the great work you're doing.
Thank you so much. I love that you share, in terms of like recognizing your purpose and leaning into that in terms of, here's what I want to communicate and here's how I show up, and showing up honestly. And yes, you're definitely motivating not just one person, you're motivating masses. I say that factually because you're definitely motivating all my friends and I. So that's more than one person. So there that is. As you think of talking about motivation, and of course, I would love to sit and continue talking to you forever, but I want to be respectful of your time. So, as we move towards wrapping up this wonderful conversation, and you're thinking about this person out there that you want to talk to them, this is a perfectionist high achiever, and they're the same person they can be at any stage of their career. What is something you wish you knew if you were in their shoes right now and you would tell them?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I really wish that I could like give them a big hug and just say, be kind to yourself. Be so kind to yourself. Like, look at who you are and look at all of these incredible things that you've already done in your young life, and celebrate those things, and be kind to yourself as you walk through this path. It's not perfectly linear. There's going to be ups and downs. You're going to face obstacles. You're going to experience failure, and that's going to hurt. But know that we all experience that. And the kindness that you can give to yourself, it's going to soften everything, and it's going to help you to remain human as you walk through it.
That was so profound. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you, Amna. I was like, it's so hard. There's so many things I could tell my younger self, but I'm so glad that you're doing this work and that you're sharing all of this to help people feel less alone. I think you're doing wonderful things.
I so appreciate your support. And for our audience, I'm going to put in all of Dr. Vater's links. And please, again, do follow her, connect with her, learn more about the Smile Scale. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
This episode is part of a special series and my budding book project on unmasking perfectionism. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. Just a quick reminder, while I am a physician, I'm not your physician, and nothing in this podcast is medical advice or any kind of professional advice. Everything shared here is based on my personal experiences, and the views expressed are entirely my own. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love for you to rate, review, subscribe, and share the show with anyone who might need a little inspiration to redefine their own version of success. I'll see you next time. Until then, keep reimagining success one small step at a time.